Distinguished Speaker Series. Today we present artist and activist Morehshin Allahyari, who I had the great fortune of seeing her speak this past summer at the I.O. conference in Minneapolis, where she instantly became my obsession. And I could not rest until I confirmed her for the series. So I'm very pleased to have her here today. I want to thank our partners for their support, the University of Michigan Museum of Art, the Ann Arbor Film Festival. Hopefully we have some film festival fans in the house, and if you're not a film festival fan, you should become a film festival fan. And Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. The quickest way to become an Ann Arbor Film Festival fan, if you're not already, is they do have a DVD launch party coming up at Arbor Brewing Company next week on Wednesday, November the 8th. This will be celebrating their newly released volume of DVD highlights from the 55th Film Festival, the most recent past festival, as well as a brand new DVD 10-pack, which is a compilation of the past 10 film festival DVDs. So that's next Wednesday at Arbor Brewing Company's tap room. That's down the street on East Washington. The doors open at 7 o'clock. Movies start at 8 p.m. There's a $5 admission, unless, of course, you're an Ann Arbor Film Festival member, and then it's free. And don't forget to fall back an hour this Sunday. And though we are entering the dark, dark days, I assure you the Penny Stamp series will be here to see you through back to the light and brighter days to come. We are going to have a regular Q&A today, so please do come to the screening room out the doors to the left, down the hallway. You'll find another theater, the screening room, where we will meet Morehshin directly after she speaks here. Please do remember to turn off your cell phones. And now, for a little background on our guest today, Morehshin Allahyari is an artist, activist, educator, and curator. She was born and raised in Iran, and she moved to the United States in 2007. Her work deals with the political, social, and cultural contradictions all of us face every day. She thinks about technology as a philosophical tool set to reflect on objects and as a poetic means to document our personal and collective life struggles in the 21st century. Morehshin is the co-author of the 3D Additivist cookbook in collaboration with writer-artist Daniel Rourke. Her modeled 3D printed sculptural reconstructions of ancient artifacts destroyed by ISIS, titled Material Speculation ISIS, have been exhibited worldwide to widespread acclaim. She's been part of numerous exhibitions, festivals, workshops around the world, including the Venice Biennale of Architecture, at the Tate Modern, Queens Museum, Pori Museum, Dallas Museum of Art, and the Jeu de Paume, among others. She's been awarded numerous artist residencies around the world. She's a recipient of the Leading Global Thinkers of 2016 award by Foreign Policy magazine, and her work has been featured in periodicals and by news agencies such as the New York Times, Huffington Post, Wired, National Public Radio, Freeze, Rhizome, Hyperallergic, and Al Jazeera. Morehshin most recently completed an artist residency at I-Beam in New York City, where she developed a new body of work on digital colonialism and refiguring, and using 3D scanners and 3D printers as her tools of investigation. And you will get to see some of this work today. She is absolutely spellbinding, and please welcome Morehshin Allahyari.
Hello, thanks for being here. 1 second, I'm gonna make sure this is stable. Thanks to all of you for being here this evening, to Christina for inviting me here, it's an honor. So today I'm going to give a talk that reflects on the relationship between the use of digital technologies and activism, digital colonialism, monstrosity, and refiguring, as it relates to both the process of making a previous project called Material Speculation ISIS and its aftermath, as well as a new in-progress project called She Who Sees the Unknown. I want to reflect on and contextualize a position outside that asks difficult questions and suggests alternative methods. But before I go on and give this talk, I would like to pause for a moment and show a video, which is a new video, and it also relates to a work that I just mentioned, She Who Sees the Unknown, which I will talk about more towards the end of my talk. So bear with me here until when I switch this.
She who saw all things in a broadband earth and beyond, and knew what was to be known. She who had seen what there was and had embraced the otherness. She to whom the image clung like a mirror, a display of crisis, and who dwelt together with a devised becoming. She knows and sees the unknown and lays them bare. She is the monstrous other, the dark goddess, the possessive jinn, the dividing persona, the alternative figure. She restores myth and histories, the untold and the forgotten, the misread and uneven, those of and from the Near East. She is an inventor and a destroyer. She prescribes and rejects. In her city there was no outside, yet doors remained open and unlocked. Her name is Huma, she who is of flame and blaze. She is a jinn made of smokeless and scorching fire, among a race created by Allah prior to humans. From the very day of her birth, she was responsible for common fever, the fever of fevers, as they called it. The heat she brings to the human body is a symptom of an underlying condition, not a condition itself. Out into the world, she comes to possess earth and humans alike. In the whole universe, there was none better, none whom she, Huma, could not best. She leads all the burnings, looking up from the sun. She is a demon with 3 heads, 2 identical, vaguely equine, one looking right and the other left, leveled within an infinite horizon to see the disaster above her. The 3rd head faces forward, above the other 2, looking into the future. Her open legs with bent knees and open arms, suppressing all creatures. Great in respect, a monster in her form, she's the sight of the warm globe and the slowly burning human. Her 3 talismans are encountered frequently. One to simply summon and invoke her, to call and conjure her, chanting her name 7 times in a row. She enters from the most unforeseen openings. She bubbles up and out of the deep, dark bowels of the earth, forcing the heat of the desert to all she will possess, in favor of the rotting and heated bodies, airs, rocks, and oceans. Her 2nd talisman is to both bring and treat the fevered skin. One no one could elude, one she's the most worshipped for. She then extends her body to make all temperatures equal, above the normal on all surfaces, for the dehydrated and the unsuffered from drought. To rise and drop the existing catastrophe in all directions, from north to south and east to west. She looks into a reflection, giving a second self to her. One half cracking, the other nourishing the hosts. To colonize the colonizers, to occupy the occupiers. Of this body and these lands, she communicates with the diseased. She is a monster and should be. Her third talisman, one she's the most feared for, one that will collapse all actuals, is the infectious madness. Rooted from the incurable heat, leading into chronic hallucinations, causing irritability, causing convolutions, causing sea-level sweat. All men gone mad by Huma, and no son was left sane to his father. And the gods cried out from this image the return of the repressed, the underprivileged. She, Huma, who shatters the unjust subject, to expose symptoms, causing delirium, causing alienation, causing horizontal difference, causing universal blurring, causing immediate cruelty of nature, all to give birth to a parallel world between the ill and the healthy flesh.
Okay, so kind of a brief introduction to my work in general. I have done work in video art, experimental animation, installation, and recently in the last 2-3 years, 3D printing, and also a lot of work that is text or creative writing. But I would say that one thing that is perhaps a common thing in all of these works is this idea of archiving and documenting, how we can think about all these different technologies and tools and platforms as a way to archive different aspects of our lives. I also have been interested in the phenomena of art activism as a phenomena that is central to our time. Art activism is not merely about criticizing the art system or the general political and social conditions under which this system functions, but rather it's about wanting to change the political, social, economical, and cultural condition by means of art. Not so much inside the art system, but outside of it. So I'm interested in art activism as a philosophy, perhaps. As a practice, as a perspective, and a lot of my work contains that. It's an important part of it to kind of think about both theory and practice as these two worlds that can come together. As I continue to talk about my work, I want you to keep this quote in mind by Donna Haraway. And somewhere in the middle of my talk, I will come back to this again. She says that it matters which stories tell stories, which concepts think concepts. Mathematically, visually, and narratively, it matters which figures figure figures, which systems systemize systems. Okay, so I want to start from this body of work called Dark Matter, which I started in 2012-13 and kind of continued working on it for 2 years. The first time that I saw an object getting 3D printed, it was almost 6 years ago. And I was really fascinated by this idea of seeing a digital file, a digital model from, a platform becoming a physical object. It blew my mind actually like watching that process. 3D printing technology has been around for over 30 years, but only recently it has become accessible and inexpensive enough for artists, designers, architects to have access to it. But I remember the first thing that I thought about when I saw a 3D printer was this kind of like political potential in that technology. And I thought about the fact that what if you could have this machine in a country like Iran, where a lot of objects or things are taboos or forbidden or censored, and then you can 3D print something that you're not supposed to have. And I thought about it more also as a symbolic gesture, as not just objects or things that are functional, but also in general, again, archiving or collecting a series of things that are taboos and forbidden in Iran. So this is, pictures you see here are the examples of some of these. From owning a dog or like walking your dog outside, which is kind of forbidden. You're not supposed to really walk your dog outside. If you have a dog, you're supposed to keep it inside your home. You can get a ticket, as you can see in that picture. Since dogs are considered dirty in Islam, so you're not really supposed to have them. To satellite dishes, which are ways for people to have access to Western channels. So the government sort of goes back and forth, bringing them down from people's houses and roofs, and that's a picture you can see there. To growing up in Iran and kind of Barbies and Simpsons being toys that the government would ask a lot of stores to bring down or not sell, again, because it promotes a certain kind of Western value that they don't want kids to grow up with. So perhaps a lot of you didn't know that some of these things are taboos or like forbidden in Iran, and I think this kind of sense of stepping out and thinking about first of all, your relationship to something that is forbidden, like how our relationship changes when something is taken away from us, but also this very like irrational notion of these things being taboos and forbidden, and sort of like this irrationality, ridiculousness. And I wanted to add a sort of humor to this as a way to read it or think about it. And by combining objects, I wanted to also ask this question that what happens when you combine certain things that are forbidden separately? Is the final form still also like forbidden or taboos? So I worked on the first model, which is a dog wearing a dildo with satellite dish. And then second one is a Buddha Simpson, again, Buddhas being, sculptures that because they promote another religion, you're not really supposed to have them or like buy them. And then Barbie and VHS. So VHS has like a very special memory for me, like growing up in Iran. My parents had this guy that would show up to our house, and he would bring these VHS movies, Western movies that, again, had scenes that you were not supposed to watch. And so he would come to our house, and I remember he had this black bag that he would like open, and then my parents would grab whatever movies they wanted to watch that week, and then he would come back again the week after, and they would exchange for new movies. He was kind of like our drug guy. But this kind of idea of, again, like thinking about this medium, this very object that was forbidden, and like watching my parents going through this whole process of trying to, get it to like watch these other movies. And then pig, or again, ham being considered dirty in Islam, so you're not supposed to eat it, and gun. And then later I expanded this project to other countries, including China, Saudi Arabia, and North Korea. And actually this piece was a 1-minute video that I made for this festival called Forever Now, which was based in Australia. And they were working with NASA to commission 35 artists and then send out kind of like a hard drive to outer space as a form of documenting our, like current lives. And I really loved this idea of how once these things, or like a documentation of these things, leave this planet, they no longer exist under certain rules or laws, and how that completely changes, their position in relationship to us humans. So sort of this idea of freeing them up to this outer space. And in the last 3 years, I've been very busy working on this project, which is the 3D Additivist Manifesto, and also the 3D Additivist Cookbook, in collaboration with artist-writer Daniel Rourke. I'm not going to have time to play this video, but the manifesto is in the form of a 10-minute video. It's online on my website, and you can watch it if you're interested. But it's a project that blurs the boundaries between art, engineering, science fiction, and digital aesthetics. One thing that we were really questioning was this fascination with the technology, with these new technologies like 3D printers, but the lack of critical dialogue around it. So many architects and designers using it without really seeing the potential for this technology. And so we wanted to kind of write a manifesto to call for action, to call artists, activists, writers, engineers to respond to it and send us different material, from recipes to blueprints to essays to art projects that would imagine new possibilities for this technology or completely would undermine it or criticize it, both in relationship to our contemporary time, meaning more of like political, social implications of it, and also in relationship to the future. So we also coined this term, which is called additivism, and it's a combination of the two words additive and activism. So additive technologies like a 3D printer or additive processes like, let's say, weaving or knitting, compared to a subtractive process, which can be a laser cut. And kind of that relationship to, again, like activism as a form of bringing these two worlds together. But additivism also became a collective for us, a community that we gathered around us that could have dialogues, not just around 3D printing or digital fabrications, but really around ideas that came with this project. And December 2016, we published this book, which is online, available for free. So if you're interested, you can look it up and download it, which is called the 3D Additivist Cookbook. And it contains the work of over 100 artists, which we made a selection from the submissions that we had, and also made some commissions from different artists or activists or writers that we wanted to collaborate with us. So it's, obviously I'm biased, but it's a very beautiful combination of kind of different minds and worlds coming together. In the last 3-4 years, I also have been doing a lot of research in the poetic relationship between plastic, oil, 3D printing, and archiving. Not necessarily from an environmental perspective or point of view, but from an activism, political point of view. We all know that there's almost no aspect of post-war and postmodern culture that has not been influenced and conditioned by oil. Plastic is a petroleum product that claims at least a quarter of all the oil extracted from Earth. It is the product of capitalism in the postmodern age. So I wanted to come up with a series of projects that would connect oil to terror and capitalism, and would use or think about plastic as the most used material in 3D printing, but also how that very material, again, can be used as a poetic and political act, and then archiving and documenting as acts against the forgetting of memory and history. Around the same time, I was reading a book by Rhizome called Cyclopedia: Complicity with Anonymous Materials. It's a first horror sci-fi book ever written on the Middle East, so if you haven't read it or if you don't know about it, and if you're interested in horror sci-fi, I highly recommend it. So this book literally opened a door for me, and this is like especially because of the lack of science fiction or this kind of like thinking coming from the Middle East, or with like kind of like pre-Islamic and Islamic thinking, and it was very important to kind of the research that I was doing, and very, very relevant. In this book, Negarstani uses horror science and theory fiction as a way to reflect on the Middle East. In his book, horror is used as a methodology to bridge the contemporary world politics and the war on terror with the history and archaeologies of the Middle East and the earth itself. Negarstani exposes the jihad and the act of terrorism as the one founded on the movement of crude oil, desert, and dust. For the last decades, these very materials have attracted both jihadists and oil-thirsty capitalists toward each other in unwinnable wars. As Negarestani elaborates, quote, "It is as if war itself is feeding upon the war machines, leveling cities into the desert, seducing the aggressors into the dark heart of oil." So oil became a metaphoric, yet politically active material in my research and ways of reading through the current historical and political narratives of our time. I started doing more research on ISIS relationship to oil, and how all of that also exists in a bigger narrative of the West and techno-capitalism, among other relationships. For example, one of the things that I really became fascinated by was the fact that ISIS could not continue their activities if it wasn't because of their access to oil. They literally had to stop somewhere there because of lack of funding. So kind of like how this material, again, can be thought about in this like symbolic way, and how it's like feeding into something that then can result to violence. Around this time, when I was thinking about this relationship with ISIS and terrorism, etc., this video of ISIS destroying the artifacts at Mosul Museum came out. This is almost 2 years ago. I can't really see all of you. Maybe if I do this, I can see. So how many of you have watched this video? All right, some hands. Okay. So the video and the way it was presented, and the fact that it went viral right after it was uploaded by ISIS, was a big shock for a lot of people, but specifically archaeologists and historians and scholars from and of the Middle East. As you watch this video, you see ISIS members pushing and breaking and hammering artifacts with performative and symbolic gestures. You see a man explaining the reason behind destruction using Quranic verses. In a section in the video, he says the Prophet Muhammad shattered the idols with his own honorable hands when he conquered Mecca. The Prophet Muhammad commanded us to shatter and destroy statues. This is what his companions did later on when they conquered lands. But of course, it would be simplistic to read this video as merely a religious act and believe that ISIS is actually concerned with values of Islam. Before anything else, this video, like other ISIS videos of beheadings and killings, is a political gesture. ISIS uses different videos and audio effects, editing methods, and social media as ways to exaggerate and promote their beliefs and their commitment to violence as symbol and proof of their dedication to the jihadist cause. Destruction of cultural heritage has been used as an act of empowerment for centuries in battles and wars. So the act of destruction is nothing new, but perhaps it has never been documented and shared before with such a clarity of intent, using social media as a site of propaganda. ISIS takes pride in destruction, while, for example, for the US military, which destroyed many historical and cultural sites in Iraq and Afghanistan in the last decade, the act of destruction is almost an incidental consequence of the larger unspoken intention to bring democracy or freedom to these regions. So for me as an artist and activist interested in 3D printing, petropolitics, archiving, there was an immediate thought and reaction after watching the video of ISIS destroying these sites. Not really from a nationalistic point of view, but rather from, again, an artistic and personal perspective. So I started to do a lot of research on Hatra, Mosul Museum, which is the second biggest museum in Iraq, where the artifacts were destroyed. And now kind of looking back at it, I keep on saying that it felt like swimming in a pool and it turned into an ocean. And this was especially because of the lack of information about these artifacts. So some of them were more known, but a lot of them were kind of forgotten. There was not enough information about them and their stories or who they were. I was doing my research in Farsi, and Arabic and English, and there would be material that wouldn't match up. Like I would see a name somewhere in an English text, and I would look at it in Arabic, and it would be another name. So it was a mess, basically. To do this research and bring all these things together took so long. Almost a year of this was kind of about gathering this material. I contacted many scholars, historians, archaeologists, friends I knew in Iran or Middle East. Somewhere in the middle of my research, I got a hold of the former staff of Mosul Museum, and that was so helpful. It completely changed where the research was going. These are two of the first artifacts that I worked on. And then to briefly talk about kind of the process of making it, I don't know how many of you know about kind of like software, like 123D Catch or Memento, but these are software that if you have, let's say, 25 to 30 images from different directions from an object, still images, you can upload them to this software and they can create a 3D model. You obviously have to clean it and work on it later, but it's a way for a lot of people to either do 3D scanning or use still images to create a model when you're dealing with, let's say, artifacts. But again, because of the lack of images, I couldn't do this. Like each object or like artifact had kind of an average of 7 to 10 images that were available that I could use, that were high quality, that we could see the details. So we had to use more of kind of a plan B, which was to 3D model them from scratch as accurately as possible. And this is just an image from the process. And then 3D printing it here in this material called resin, which is the closest material I could find that was like dense and more like kind of heavier, closer to the stone feeling that these materials were originally in. And then inside these objects, I don't know how well you can see it, but I have embedded a memory card or flash drive that contains all the information that I have gathered around the artifacts, images, PDF files, my email correspondence, the process of making the work, and also STL or OBJ files, which are standard 3D printing files of all the models, which means that you can basically 3D print them if you have access to those files. I'm gonna say this since I get this question all the time, that you don't have to destroy the artifacts to get into the memory cards and flash drives, but the way I've designed it, if I go back here, there's a hole inside the artifact. So when it gets printed, that hole has only this thing that is called support material, meaning that you can kind of like empty out the hole and again, embed these memory cards and flash drives inside the artifacts. And then I seal it with the same material, which is resin. So the idea was really to think about these sculptures as time capsules to be kept for the future civilizations, and as a way to kind of resist that forgetting of memory. I'm going to go through the 12 artifacts that I have worked on and reconstructed. Also, when the destruction happened, there were a lot of kind of conversations around how some of these artifacts were duplicates, and some of them were original, and I wanted to make sure that the ones that I work on were the original ones to reconstruct. So all of these that you're seeing are the ones that were destroyed that were original. Just the process of 3D printing some of them. And recently, 5 months ago, I started working on also these 3 heads that were destroyed. You can see them being shot by ISIS members on the wall in South Ivan in the museum outside. And kind of with these, I changed the material, and the idea was more to kind of this idea of dead drop heads, where like the audience can come to the museum and then bring their laptop or hard drive and connect it to the sculptures and get all the information and all the research that I have gathered. But one thing that also became important for me as this process progressed was how to give access to this material to also the current civilizations, how to find a way to share this work. And February 2016, I worked with Rhizome and New Museum to release a folder that contains all the research that I have gathered that are inside the artifacts. And one of the artifacts, which is King Uthal, you see him here, that is accessible for people to, download or save or like 3D print if they want. I'm in the process of figuring out how to release the other artifacts, and that's kind of like still in progress, and it's like a bit of a tricky situation. And as I continue talking about the aftermath of this project, perhaps that will make more sense. But one thing that was amazing was this kind of acts of digital activism, collective sharing and archiving that happened. So many people downloaded the folder, or like were 3D printing it and tweeting it at me, like sending me the pictures of the King Uthal being 3D printed. But also how collectively we can resist, kind of, in this case, a destruction of a history. Okay. I'm going to let this video play for a second.
It is with great, great pleasure, therefore, that I hereby unveil the oldest new structure in the history of this city. Ladies and gentlemen, the Triumphal Arch of Palmyra. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, the video you see on your right side is by artist Ryan Woodring, which was kind of a reappropriation of the video that you see on the left side. This is where we're entering the aftermath of this project, and also this is where I want us to come back to the quote that I shared at the very beginning of my talk. It matters which figures figure figures, which systems systemize systems. So in the last 3-4 years, since the destruction of the artifacts, there has been many attempts and projects by the UN, different tech companies and institutions, especially in the US and Europe, to reconstruct the sites and artifacts in Syria and Iraq that were destroyed by ISIS. This is one of the examples, which was kind of this site, which is called Palmyra. It's an 1800-year-old site which was destroyed in Syria. And it was reconstructed, and then here you see the relaunching of it in London. And then they also brought it to New York. So again, how many of you know about this project or saw it? None of you. None of you? Okay, some hands. Okay. So the question that remains, or something that I became very interested in, was why these institutions are interested in such acts. What does it mean to take a site or an artifact from the Middle East and destroyed by ISIS and rebuild it and position it in London or New York? How does this repositioning and reorientation changes or ignores the historical and political narratives that usually get lost in this very techno-utopian, simplistic, binary reading of political events? In her essay, Unbound the Politics of Scanning, Orit Gat asks an extremely important question. She says we're living in an age where activism is marked by the information economy, where it is undeniable that WikiLeaks is one of the organizations most influential in shaping the international political reality, and where making information available does, in fact, oftentimes mean making a difference. So these tech heroes holding the 3D scanners in their hands and defending this shared heritage, they become a figure that is there to sustain the normal, to become a white savior, to reclaim the future, to reclaim these histories. What's often forgotten is the question of access and archival of this information. The 3D models and information for so many of the historical sites and artifacts that are being 3D scanned are not being released to the public. This is the example, which is an institution called SciArc. And if you go to this website, they have images of the artifacts, they have information about them, but you can't really 3D model the artifacts. If you ask them to give it to you, give you a 3D model of it because you're working on a project, they tell you that they only can give access to private institutions. So basically, they're also making a lot of monetary profit of these acts of scanning and reconstruction. In addition to all this complication with access, authorship, and what I'm calling digital colonialism, there were other layers of complications. So kind of to explain this kind of idea of digital colonialism a bit more, is this idea of how we're experiencing this new phenomena of colonialism. Obviously, colonizing historical and cultural heritage is not new. We all know about it. You go to a Met museum and you see a whole gate of, you know, a country in the museum. But how these new tools are going to mark, new tools like 3D scanners, these tools that are like very magical, and you know, kind of this idea of saving the cultural heritage of the world, they are going to mark new eras of colonialism in ways we have not experienced before. And this is what I'm calling digital colonialism. So in addition to all those complications, there was something else that kept on happening when I was working on my project, which was after like it came out, it received a lot of press attention. And I would get kind of titles like this, which is, Artist Battles ISIS with a 3D printer. This artist fights ISIS with 3D printing in virtual reality, which I still don't know what it means, so if you figure it out. Working on a project like this comes with a lot of complications, especially in current political circumstances, like Brexit and the rise of figures like Trump and Farage, in which Muslims are experiencing a lot of generalizations and Islamophobic attitudes towards them. Being an artist born and raised in Iran, through the development of this project, I found it necessary to remind my audience, the press, etc., that ISIS does not mean Muslims, and that we should also talk about US military's destruction of sites in Afghanistan and Iraq in the last 1 decade, and that we should talk about the role of the US military in the formation of ISIS in first place. The lesson of the Islamic State is that war creates terrorism. It's easy to get lost in how horrible ISIS is by forgetting the cycle that ISIS exists in. ISIS reclaims the objects through destruction, through creating absence. The Western tech companies and digital archaeologists reclaim it after destruction, through a new kind of presence. And we fail to see the problem of that presence in the way that we see the absence. So in many ways, people in the West would just take this us versus them approach about my project, which I found troubling. Us, Westerners, civilized humans, trying to save the destroyed, shared, universal heritage of the world against the savages, Muslims, terrorists who are violent and are trying to destroy it. I often think that so much of the life I live is stuck in the middle of these kind of black and white perspectives. Stuck between extremist Muslims and US military and politics, between no easy entrance to the US and Europe for holding an Iranian passport until I had it, and self-exiled from Iran. These are the realities of my life and the life of many other Iranians, Muslims, Middle Easterns, etc. We live these realities and it feels being torn apart between them. So my way of processing that, my very own way of perhaps approaching and addressing that in a project like this is to loop back and rebuild on my previous work, perhaps even interrupt it. To make visible what has been invisible, to question colonialism and techno-capitalism alongside ISIS as ways to respond to uncomplex responses. But also, more importantly, to look for new ways to position the Middle East. I want to move beyond a simple binary view of West versus Islam, tech future versus religious history, and to look to forgotten, misrepresented, and suppressed histories and narratives. This is where we come to the work that I am working on currently, called She Who Sees the Unknown. So I used all these ideas around cultural heritage, digital colonialism, ownership of history, to kind of like think about how through these acts of refiguring as an activism and feminism practice, I can reappropriate these stories, but also use these narratives and mythical stories from the Middle East to kind of relate it to issues, political issues, in relationship to the present and the future. In this body of work, I am looking at gathering, first of all, an archive of female monstrous figures, monstrous figures, dark goddesses, from different, again, mythical and narratives from the Middle East. These are all texts from 1700 years ago to 500, 600 years ago. Before I kind of explain this project more, I want to talk about these two terms that I've been very inspired by from, again, Donna Haraway and Rosie Braidotti, which is this concept of figuration or fabulation. I would say that I'm also specifically interested in refiguration, a practice of alternative representation with myth and tales as a point of departure. For me, refiguring is as much about changing the past that is about changing the future. It's about going back and reimagining the past so that we can create and reimagine alternative multiple futures and worlds. In this new body of work, I want to disturb and mutate the patriarchal colonized realities and figures. And this is where the idea of the monstrous other is important to me. I connect with a monstrous figure not just from a ficto or fictional feminist position, but also from the position of the other in a personal way. This is what Rosie Braidotti defines as the pejorative otherness, or monstrous others, which in her words helps to illuminate the paradoxical and asymmetrical power relationships within Western theories of subjectivity. She says that the monstrous as a borderline figure blurs the boundaries between hierarchically established distinctions, between human, non-human, Western, non-Western, and so on, and also between horizontal differences. In some ways, through these acts of refiguration and reappropriation and interruption, I want to suggest a positive potential of the crisis of and by these humanist and non-humanist subjects. So the whole project has a practical part, which, as I mentioned briefly, is about archiving, creating an archive of these female monstrous figures that all are from the Middle East or Near East, which currently doesn't exist. We don't have an archive that specifically focuses on these kind of figures. And then build a reading room that the audience can come in and like read about them and know about their stories. And also give access online to the archive after this project is done. This is, for example, one of the resources that I've been using if you're interested in this kind of concepts. It's an amazing book. It's a book called عجایب المخلوقات و خلایق الموجودات, meaning marvels of creatures and strange things existing. And it's one of the most important kind of books of the Arabic Islamic world and pre-Islamic world that we have that kind of combines this like very beautiful hyper combination of human and non-human kind of monstrous figures. The conceptual part of the project is to use 3D printers and 3D scanners to create the sculptures. So the process is to kind of choose some of these figures. I'm hoping by the end of this research it will be 12 of them, as a way to also, again, respond back or mirror it with material speculation series, which were 12 artifacts. And each of them will have their own talismans and their own stories. The video I showed at the very beginning of this talk is one of the videos that I've made for Huma, which is a jinn or a genie that brings fever to human body. So I find these illustrations and like reappropriate them, I 3D model them, and then 3D print that figure, and then 3D scan kind of the models that I 3D print. But I'm also thinking about this process of 3D scanning as this ritual refiguring sessions. Going back to when I was talking about 3D scanner as this tool that is in the hand of mostly Western kind of like, and mostly men who go there and try to document these histories, is about kind of taking that outside of that and then rebuilding something else from it. And this is going to become like a series of performances, but also I use the material that I gather for some of the videos and stories that I'm telling. This is Huma, again, the djinn that I presented at the beginning of this talk. And to briefly, very briefly, like kind of explain the concept behind that, one of the things that I became very interested in when I read about her, which is a djinn that brings fever to a human body, was kind of to connect this heat to also the heat that we're experiencing on the planet, right? The whole conversation about global warming. But also to think about and talk about catastrophe, right? Whose catastrophe are we talking about? When we think about global warming as this thing that is going to happen in the future, that is already happening in the present, and if we experience like a very like real catastrophe, who is going to be left behind? And how the very current injustice and inequalities that we're experiencing in relationship to race specifically is going to play a role also in that the future of, you know, that catastrophe. So kind of Huma comes to talk about that conversation around global warming, which is still very Western, it's very white. It serves or will serve eventually, when people are going to survive, a very specific group of people, whether they're going to go to Mars or, you know, have other plans. Okay. Another figure that I want to briefly talk about is these figures called Ya'juj Ma'juj that I found when I was doing, again, research around these dark goddess figures. So I was in Berlin when the Muslim ban happened. I just, you know, left my house in New York, went for a festival called Transmediale, and I think it was like 5-6 days after I left when the ban happened. And I was, you know, holding an Iranian passport and a green card, which meant that for the first like 10 days of like going back and forth between like lawyers, etc., not knowing what this ban mean, it meant that it included me, which meant that I couldn't go back to my house in New York. So it was like a very strange moment in my life, kind of like thinking that I left everything and now I can't go back to it. I also can't go back to Iran because I've done a lot of political work, so it's a sort of like self-exile thing that I don't feel very safe to go back there. So that meant that if I couldn't come back, it was like a restart to a lot of things to my life. And after I got to come back, and you know, some weeks after, I came across this story, which is the story of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, which are these figures or a community, a group of people in the Quran, and they represent chaos. The story is that they are trying to enter this city, or they come to Earth to bring mischief, and an iron wall gets built to keep them out, to keep them away, like out, and then that this is how the people will stay safe. And the kind of very apocalyptic Islamic view of this is that when they break this wall is when we were going to experience kind of this ending, which I'll talk about at the end of this talk. But what I was very fascinated by was this kind of notion of monstrosity, right? I kind of, through this whole project, but also specifically with this figure, I was fascinated by this idea of embracing the monstrosity rather than wanting to reject it. And maybe the first kind of ideas around that came with the reaction that I received or kept on seeing a lot on social media when the ban happened. People would like post things or like message me or like say things like, oh, but like she's such a great person, she's doing like so many good works and she's like very inspiring, or like would say that about other Muslim friends they had, about how good they were. So they deserve to live in the US. And I like kind of like had to pause and like think that that is such a dangerous position, to think that people who only deserve to live here are the people that are inspiring and good, you know? And so much of these ideas around monstrosity is about that. It's about, rather than wanting to say that, no, look, we're so good, we're here to do good things, we're not trying to harm anyone, is how to kind of, in a symbolic way, and this is something that, again, if you're interested to read more about this, Rosie Braidotti talk about this a lot. But she talks about it more from a feminist perspective, but how through embracing horror, embracing monstrosity, you can turn that very power that is trying to oppress you against or like around. So this is just the process of printing and 3D scanning it. This is a project that is going to actually open up in the coming days. I'm gonna miss the opening because I'll be in Chicago, but it's a project that I did in collaboration with CARE, which is the Council on American Islamic Relationships, and MAP, which is an institution which is Make Art for Purpose. And these are going to be like posters, like double-sided posters in the city, in New York, in 2 or 3 different locations. And kind of the ideas that the back will talk about all these issues around xenophobia and Islamophobia. And the front is the image of Ya'juj and Ma'juj and a sentence from a video that I've worked on. So if you're in New York, and if you look up this project, you can see it in the city. To end this talk, I want to kind of end with this, the end of days. So one thing that is very fascinating about the readings of Ya'juj and Ma'juj as figures, again, this is a story that is in the Quran, so almost 1,500 years old, right? There are a lot of different interpretations of this story. So there's a time that it was said that, oh, these represent Turkish people who were attacking Iran, or like Mongolians, or a very like contemporary read of it is that they represent Israel. So it's interesting how through different time, you know, through many, many years of living as humans and as civilized humans, etc., we always have looked for this other that we need to like, you know, either like ban or reject or like murder or kill, etc. But in the Quran, it says that when Ya'juj and Ma'juj come and break this wall, it's gonna be the end of days. And I really love that because it doesn't say the end of the world, and it doesn't say the end of the time. These are like a very common ways of kind of like these apocalypse ending phrases that get used. So yeah, I sort of like want us to think about that. And how at this very moment, at this very kind of everything that is happening with the current political situations, it's so important, especially for those of us, I guess for all of us, not just for those of us that are like people of color or come from like specific group of people, but for all of us to build futures that are alternative futures, that are other worlds. And to also perhaps build multiple futures. One thing I've been saying is that I don't want to live in the future of Elon Musk. Like, let's not live in the future of Elon Musk, because that future is so limited to, you know, a certain privileged person. And it's so important to think about building these other worlds and interrupting that future that we're all so comfortable with imagining. So yeah, I'm gonna leave you with this, the end of days quote. Thank you.